Check, check. Is that high enough? MasterCard, Visa, check. Good morning.
Good morning.
That was pretty sorry. Let me try that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. Wow, Drew, you've been here 22 years. That's great. Surprised. No, I'm not, because I did his master's thesis on Romans 9, and that's one of the hardest sections of the New Testament, Romans 9 through 11. So we did it on predestination and that sort of stuff. I didn't understand what he wrote myself. But anyway, I'm glad I'm retired from Freed Hardeman now after 39 years, and I was there with Rick Brooks. He was with us for a while, and now he's at UAB doing cadavers and stuff because a lot of people cannot tolerate it. No, I'm just kidding. You're actually doing cadavers. This is weird because I've got to have a couple of implants in my teeth because I'm old and they broke off. And they're going to use cadaver dust, to anchor, up in there. Isn't that cool? My mouth will be dead all the time. Okay, isn't that great? My wife Joyce is here somewhere. I don't know where she is. There you are, baby. She's right here, right behind Drew. Okay, so this is unusual because we got to eat last night at Martin's Barbecue. I got to meet Jackson. He can eat a lot of chicken. I ate more than he did. And I met Ava. We have a lot of common things. We have 2 adopted children. We have 2 natural children. But there's no such thing as natural children because they all have brain damage. Okay, but we got 4 daughters. Why? Because we don't want 5. And we have 8 grandchildren, and we'd like to have some more of those. They are pretty cool. I've heard about this church for a long time. David Lipe is my friend from another planet. He and I are just wonderful friends. I love David. Talked with him, matter of fact, this last week. Colton. I know Colton because I know his mom and dad, of course. I know everybody's mom and dad because I'm old, but I know his mom and dad, love his mom and dad, Joe and Aaron. And then Drew's dad, I met in the 1970s, Andy. I met him in the 1970s when I was in Martin, Tennessee, and we've been friends for a long time. And then, as a matter of fact, Julie's dad, Charles Carkin, and I went to school together in Memphis at Harding Graduate School back in the 70s. So it's unusual to be at a place where I have so many connections, even though I don't know a lot of you yet, but I want to do that. And I'm not Dr. Gilmore anymore. I retired. My name is Ralph. And we want to make sure that you have a chance to meet us and we get a chance to meet you. Okay, so here we go. All right, you ready? Do y'all sing here? Do you? You sing good? To Canaan's land I'm on my way where the soul never dies. My darkest night will turn to day where the soul never dies. No friends are well, no diadem dies. Where all is love and the soul never dies. All right, now maybe you know this one. You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous for words, too wonderful for comprehension, like nothing ever seen or heard. Who can grasp your infinite wisdom? Who can fathom the depths of your love? You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above. And I stand in awe of you. I stand in awe of you. Holy God, to whom all praise is due, I stand in awe of you. Be seated, please. It is the greatest thing in the world to be a Christian. Amen. All right, most of you believe that. Let's try it one more time. It is the greatest thing in the world to be a Christian. Amen. Okay, so these guys over here are a little different from these guys over here. All right, why these guys over here are younger, and they do stuff that I don't usually do, Colton. You go to Starbucks, for instance. At a gospel meeting recently, I didn't carry enough clothes. It was an accident. And so I went to Goodwill and bought some shirts for $5. That will not buy you a grande or a latte at Starbucks. And so whenever you think you go to Starbucks, or you do the other stuff, your generation's Chipotle and all of that stuff, and you think about, the Swedes that make furniture, what's their name? Oh, yeah, IKEA. Do you have IKEA? That's pretty cool, except they don't have anything that reclines, and we know what has killed all of the Swedes, because they have no place to recline in their house. All right, in our house, we have 8 things that recline, 4 upstairs, 4 downstairs, because that's our generation. Another thing, I got this Buc-ee's cup right here, except guess what? This is from the real one in Fort Worth. And so a couple of years ago when I was in Texas, one of the guys says, man, we got to take my best friend Jeff Jenkins, outside the family. Okay, he said, let's go to Buc-ee's, and he took us to Buc-ee's, and it was pretty cool. So now you got a Buc-ee's here, and that's another thing that's going to separate the communication between the younger generation and the older. It's just another thing after another, after another, after another. Now, when I was teaching, my daughters would sometimes try to keep me up to snuff. And then if that didn't work, I'd do Urban Dictionary to try to figure out what is going on with the new generation, because I couldn't figure it out. Well, here's the deal. We're going to talk today about trying to communicate between the generations. We're going to talk today about how that would look like pleasing God with regard to some things that are bothering the churches of Christ right now and a lot of other churches. That would be, a cappella singing, the role of women in male spiritual leadership, and some of that kind of stuff. We can't get to all that stuff today. It's an introduction. And then finally, this afternoon is going to be partly a work session as we talk together about what we can try to do to try to reach the new generations. Now, the new generations, generally speaking, it's kind of a random line here, but let's say 1987 is the year that the Millennials started being born. 1987, and then the world started to get weird. Okay, all right, not to the Millennials, 1987. How many of you born since 1987? Hands up, let's see where you are. Come on. Any Millennials here at all? All right, well, we can have a pretty good worship service. A Bible study. All right, 1987 will be the Millennials. All right, 1997 will be Generation Z. How many of you born since 1997? Hands up, hands up. All right, so 1997, you're Generation Z. Now, the problem that we have is that we are, as a whole, not communicating well with the Millennials and the Generation Z, because they're generally, even if they're brought up in the churches of Christ, are going to church somewhere else. Even if they're brought up in the churches of Christ, they're generally going somewhere else. Now, why are they going somewhere else? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And is there anything that we can do about it? So I wrote this book. My wife was overcoming cancer at the time. She's doing quite well, by the way. And she's able to be here. We've been married 50 years. 48 of them have been happy. Those first 2 are a little rough. Okay, but we've been married for 50 years, and we're going for 51 in June, so everything is good about that. But as she was sick in the hospital and trying to overcome a blockage, I was outlining this book and thinking, all right, now I've been teaching this class for a long time at Freed-Hardeman called Contemporary Concerns. As Drew told you, by the way, I love this guy. He's one of my favorites. Okay, but as I think about it, I think about, how do they think about, why did I write this book? All right, here you go. Because of my passion in trying to communicate with this age group, because they are the ones that were the majority of my class. I taught maybe 8,000 students over 39 years at Freed-Hardeman, and during that time, almost all of them are in this category. Now, there'll be a few older ones, along the way, graduate students and stuff, but most of them are right there. And by the time I left Freed-Hardeman 2 years ago, it was almost totally Generation Z. Not even Millennials anymore, almost totally Generation Z. And it's difficult to communicate with them. Why? Well, because a lot of the ways that I've been taught to communicate don't work with them. I am Cinny, C-E-N-I. Y'all say that, Cinny. C-E, 1, 2, 3. Cinny. All right, Cinny is command, example, necessary inference. Cinny, i.e., Church of Christ, way we've been brought up, way we think. All right, Cinny, command, example, necessary inference. Now, even though you may not have studied the Restoration Movement very much, You know about Barton W. Stone and Alexander and Thomas Campbell. You know about Raccoon John Smith and a lot of the people that were a part of the American Restoration movement. And one of the ways they went about restoring the New Testament church is like somebody had lost the game, how to play the game of baseball. And nobody played baseball for, a couple of hundred years. And then somebody found a book written by the guy who invented baseball saying, here's how you play baseball. If you wanted to restore the game of baseball, you look in the book and you read and you restore the way that it was played. Now, that's the idea behind the New Testament church. That's the idea behind New Testament Christianity. That's the idea behind most of the churches of Christ, because that's the way we've been trained to think, except the younger guys. Now, I'm not saying that you guys don't know about that, but I'm saying that as a whole, your generation didn't care much about that. Why? Because it's history. And because it is history, who cares? I mean, who reads the signs about the history of North Alabama? Oh, this is beautiful here, by the way. Who reads the signs? You know why it's beautiful? Because we flew in at 3 o'clock Saturday morning from West Texas. And compared to West Texas, any place is beautiful. All right, but we flew into where it was 99 degrees and it was dry and all that stuff, and had a flight from Midland, Texas that was delayed. So we get in Saturday morning at 3 o'clock, and then we sleep a little bit, and we head here. And let me just tell you, this place is pretty in comparison to where we've been. But it's just pretty anyway, because I'm a Middle Tennessee guy, and I love the hills. And I love the greenery, and this is part of who I am. I don't have a problem with that. But these guys struggle with the way that I've been taught to do stuff. Now, the way that I've been taught to do stuff is the 5 and the 5. 5 and the 5. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. Singing, praying, preaching, Lord's Supper, giving. 5. All right, why? Because that's the only PowerPoint they had in the days that they were preaching on the stumps in Kentucky. So they're standing on the stumps like Benjamin Franklin saying, and here's how you be saved. Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized. It fills all your fingers up if you have a standard hand. Okay? And then over here you got singing, praying, preaching, Lord's Supper, giving, right? And so yes, that's how you do it. That's how they went about doing it. I don't know exactly how much of this is apocryphal, but Thomas Campbell, whenever he had written for a group of men, by the way, the Declaration and Address, had a rough copy of it in his saddlebags when he met his son who had been shipwrecked in Scotland. And his son was trying to figure out, how am I going to say to my dad that I am no longer a Calvinist? That I don't accept the 5 points of Calvinism. How am I going to explain that to my dad? And then the dad is thinking, how am I going to explain this to my son? Because both of them had studied their way out of Calvinism. Do y'all know the 5 points of Calvinism? T-U-L-I-P? Or what's T stand for? Totally proud. It was U stand for? Unconditional election. What's the L stand for? Y'all don't really know this, do you? All right, limited atonement. Number 4, T-U-L-I, irresistible grace. And then the P stands for perseverance of the saints. All right, and both of them are saying, we don't any longer believe that. We don't believe in baptizing babies or any of that stuff. We don't think that people are predestined to be saved, Romans 9. Okay, we don't believe that anymore. And so they begin to try to find their way to the New Testament church by looking through commands and examples, and some of them through necessary inference. Command, example, necessary inference. Now, my mentor at Freed-Hardeman was Thomas B. Warren. Y'all heard of him? Hands up if you've heard of Thomas B. Warren. All right, he was my mentor. He was also David Light's mentor. Neither one of us would have a PhD in philosophy if Dr. Warren had not encouraged us both to do that. All right, and so we got that because of trying to defend the faith, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, Brother Warren taught a little variation on the 4, but he still taught the 4. When is an example binding? 1975. All right, so we come out of that. Now, the new guys, and by the way, when I refer to these guys over here as being this generation, I'm not saying that you all believe what I'm saying, but I'm saying as a whole, your generation has a difficulty trying to understand the background out of which we have come. And that would mean, what's the deal about this? Whenever you think about it, do we really do that by command, example? Do we interpret the Bible by command, example, necessary inference? Is there not a better way to do this? For instance, if I say the argument from silence, well, that makes perfect sense to me because I've been taught that Colton my whole life. by the way, interim, intern, whatever it is that you are here, I am glad that you're here, brother. Okay, and matter of fact, I like Colton very much. He will do a wonderful job for you, although he's feeling a little bit overwhelmed at this point. But he's got a good group to work with, and it's going to be all right. So as we think about them, do they respond to the argument of silence? No. They respond to sinning? No. Do they ever read the little Gospel Advocate cards that were about this big, that were printed by the Gospel Advocate Company that I grew up with? You know, I'm 71. I grew up with them when I was 4 or 5 years old. Do they respond to that? No. Why? Because that's not their generation. So the question then is, how do you communicate to people who no longer speak your language? Which is the point that I'm trying to make here. I am an 8-track tape player in a Bluetooth world. All right, that's it. That's it. A matter of fact, we were just with Paul Sherrow, who preaches for 44 years now. He has preached in San Angelo, Texas congregation. We were just staying with them in Texas before we came back. Paul has his hearing aids connected to his Bluetooth so that he can answer his phone with his hearing aids. I'm thinking, Jesus is coming soon. All right, you know, there's no way that should happen. How in the world can that happen? I do not know. It could bother you while you're preaching, however. Okay, so we are speaking different languages. So in my contemporary concerns class, what I tried to do for several years is let them talk to me, whatever it is. Nothing is off limits. If you're bothered about something about the churches of Christ, we're going to talk about it. You know, whatever it is, we're going to talk about it. And we're going to do it in a respectful way, but nonetheless, whatever the issues are, we're going to talk about what's going on in the churches of Christ. So are we the only ones that are struggling with this age group? No, McDonald's is struggling with them too. According to the information that I have here in the book, McDonald's is no longer in the top 10 fave restaurants, which would be favorite, not in the top 10 anymore. And that bothers McDonald's. Why? Because they got a lot of burgers to sell. All right, and if you guys do not relate to Ronald McDonald anymore, then how are you going to be reached so that you will go to McDonald's to buy, you know, fast food? Well, that means then we're going to change the concept of, you know, the quarter pounder to where it's the Mac wrap. All right, we're going to take some of the same stuff and we're going to wrap it in a tortilla, and we're going to call it a wrap, which to me means music. Okay, but nonetheless, you say, all right, well, okay, you're from Middle Tennessee. What are you going to have? You're going to have a burger, or are you going to have a wrap? I'm going to have a wrap if that's the only thing left on the table. All right, and so, but if it is a hamburger, I recognize it because that's what I want. But the newer generation wanted that, and they wanted breakfast most of the day. And by the way, we got to cater to them because how are we going to stay in business if we don't? Because in Jackson, Tennessee, where we lived for 40 years, there's an exit there, exit 82, that you can take off and go south. On the left-hand side, you can find Shoney's, and they no longer spoke the language of the new generation. And therefore, Shoney's either went out of business or is near the point of going out of business because they don't speak their language. Then you go down, and there's Sears on the right-hand side. Well, they stopped speaking their language. Amazon just about killed them. And then there's J.C. Penney, right, you know, around the corner in the mall there. And I'm going to stretch you a little bit by going across the street to Service Merchandise, which used to be a wonderful place to buy jewelry and stuff. And it's also out of business. Why? They did not respond well to the changes in culture. They didn't anticipate it. They didn't stay in front of it. And they let other people outdo them in their business model. Matter of fact, in Texas, where I just been, Paul and I, we were driving from Midland. Why? Because it was cheaper to fly in there than it was to fly in San Angelo. Okay, so we're 2 hours, we're driving through, and Paul was saying, well, here's the church Christ, it's half the size it used to be. And here's church Christ, it's 3/4 the size it used to be. And here's church Christ no longer exists, ... After a while, Richard, you catch on. And that is, no, wait a minute, what's happening here? Why is it that in so many places are we dwindling in the churches of Christ? And one of the things is we are no longer adjusting to the changes in culture as we should. Now, there are a number of ways in which Generation Z and Millennials are different. For instance, Generation Z, they're more college educated. More of them go to college, and so you'd expect them in your class, etc. Millennials, not quite as college educated as Generation Z, but Generation Z, 1 in 2 of them is going to go to college. 41% of them know how to multitask. Why? Because they can text in one hand and tweet in the other, and do something else with their feet. I mean, they can do that. They can multitask. Now, can I do that? No. I text with one finger. If you expect me to text, it would be better if I used hieroglyphics, because I do not text, style. I don't do that. Nope. My daughter says, Dad, it's just like a keyboard. And I say, here, you do it. All right, but I don't do that like they do, but I do know how to text. And I did send this email to myself just in case, the PowerPoint didn't work. And I have learned a couple little tricks along the way, in order to try to get to my file, if indeed it doesn't come off of my jump drive, etc. And so we find some ways in which they are the same. They are tech savvy, they're multitaskers, they're innovative, they're educated, and they're also strong in sales. That's pretty important if we're going to preach the gospel to the world. Now, I want you to focus in the middle right there and say to yourself, okay, are we focusing on those people? You might say, no, we're not. We're going to wear double knit suits until they come back in. Okay, we are going to wear white ties until they come back in. Today, I intentionally did not wear a tie because I am retired, and my favorite song is No Ties in Heaven. All right, I don't wear ties anymore. I might wear a tie to somebody's funeral or to a wedding, but I just don't. Now, you can if you want to, and if you feel good about it, Drew, you look wonderful in a tie, might I say. All right, but if you're going to ask Ralph to come, Ralph is going to dress casually because that's what, number one, I can do, and secondly, that's what I should do if I am giving these lessons. If I'm giving these lessons, why should I be up here in a 2 or 3 piece suit? Because it would seem that I don't understand what I'm saying. Because to the younger generation, even Freed Hardeman changed their dress code for the Bible faculty during the last few years that I was there. And I was thinking, yeah, they're catching up with me. I would wear a tie, but I would never tighten it. David Lipe would say about me that if I die first and if my tie is not tightened, he's going to reach in the casket and he's going to tighten it. And then I've got some suggestions of what I'm going to do if he dies first. All right? But if you were to spend some time thinking about those people born since 1987, 1997, and if you look at the churches of Christ, and I do go to several of them now because I'm not a full-time preacher anymore, and I go to several churches of Christ in a year, several lectureships, several Bible counts, and when I look out at a lot of congregations, those are the ones that are underrepresented. There's not enough in that age group. Which makes you wonder, okay, we're all right now. Like the guy falling off a 20-story building, and every time somebody can hear him say, I'm all right so far, I'm all right so far, I'm all right so far. I'm all right so far. Why? Because we still doing all right. Where are you going to be in 20 years? What about those guys right there? If we have not reached them as we should, where are we going to be? So, what about the relationship between them? According to a survey in 2000 of this age group, 62% of them say they like to talk to God, but only half of them think it has anything to do with going to church. And therefore, they are called the none generation, N-O-N-E. Why? If you ask them in a survey, and if they freely answer you, what religion are you connected to? The number one religion is none. None. And it's growing larger as we speak. If you doubt it, on Memorial Day, look and see how many of them made plans to go to church. And you say, what about them? What do we do to try to reach them? Well, it's a C word there. It's a bad word. It's kind of like, you know how many elders it takes to change a light bulb? Change? Did somebody say change? Okay, so here's the problem of change. Change is good as long as you don't ask me to move out of my seat. Joyce stood right back there for a while until she found out where you guys sat. Why? Because we've been to enough Church of Christ to know that you never sit in a seat with a quilted, crocheted cover. You never do it. Why? Because that's somebody's. You know, and they've been there since the war, and you do not sit in that seat. But what about change? Would you be willing to change if it meant the difference between survival and not surviving? There's a filtering process of coming to try to figure out what to do as our culture does change, and certainly it does. 3 ways you can do everything you can think of to try to get people in church, just whatever it is. Everything. A church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, during Easter, brought in hot air balloons to drop Easter eggs, on Easter Sunday. Are you going to be able to outdo that? It's probably not. All right, and so what's that all about? Well, because the kids come. And when the kids come, the parents come. Then all of a sudden, you're looking at a huge congregation because, they're really thinking big here. But on the other hand, they don't have many guardrails. You know what a guardrail is? Okay, they don't have many guardrails. Just say, I can't go there. Can't go that far. Because there are not many guardrails. They can go wherever they want to. And they can do stuff that we can't do. They can have female preachers. They can bring in a 43-piece orchestra. They can do stuff that we can't do. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, on the other hand, what if you choose to do nothing? Well, things don't look good for a lot of us. Some of us will survive, but by and large, the 2 million members or so that we claim to have, we're not going to be able to find them in 25 years. At least not that many. Or you could do something. Well, guess which one I'm going to advocate. Doing nothing is called cultural overhang in missiology or isolationism. I like to call it that because we think I'm isolated from culture, and here in this beautiful part of Alabama, culture change is never going to hit me, except there's that big old Buc-ee's right there. And then there's that big old Bass Pro thing right over there. And then there's that big old racetrack right over there. Oh, no, we're not going to change. You can't be isolated from change. I mean, the guy who owns the Hampton Hotel where we stayed last night, apparently he's got some money because he anticipated change. He's got these real old motorcycles on loan there inside the hotel because he has done quite well with change. On the other hand, the other word is do anything I can think of. That's called syncretism. That means trying to make oil and water mix. It's not going to mix, but I'm going to try to mix it together anyway. This is actually true in Mexico. Some of the drug lords tried to make sure that their people were still committed to Catholicism by making some of the drug lords patron saints of the Catholic Church. Now, these guys that are into selling drugs and prostitution and everything else can now be a patron saint of the church because they're going to try to mix together things that don't mix. And whenever that happens, that's called syncretism. Well, the word that is preferred is contextualization, and that means I'm taking something, I'm going to move it from one context to the other without changing. So if I were to take this, let's do this quick. Y'all up for this? Okay, this is a clicker right here. I'm going to give it to you, hon, and pass it all the way down to here. Okay, give it to the next person and the next person. Okay, and let's see what happens here. One more. All right, so what do you think? Is this the same clicker? Same clicker? Yes, no. But it has changed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then back to me 7 times. It has changed context with an S on it 7 times. Is it the same clicker? That's the idea of the church. As the church passes through history, whether or not the church is in Mexico or Guatemala, I've done a good deal of work in South America. I don't speak Spanish, but I got a daughter who does, and we have 2 grandchildren who were born in the Dominican Republic. So I love Hispanic people, and so if you're going to move from one to the next, how can the church be in Leeds, Alabama, and still be the church if it's in Mexico City? How can it still be the church? And so it's called contextualization. Don't change anything that is necessary to the identity of it when you move from one context to another. Don't change anything that is necessary. But boy, I've been to enough countries to know that they sure partake of the Lord's Supper in different ways. One place in Nigeria, they didn't even partake of the Lord's Supper by passing it. Why? Because there was a table at the front, they prayed for the emblems, and everybody came to the front and passed by the table and got the emblems. Right now, we're not passing the Lord's Supper table. That's unscriptural. Why? We got those little thingies here. Do y'all have the real ones, or do you have the ones that taste like styrofoam? Okay, all right, so you got those, and you say, that's the way we're going to do it now. Well, is that scriptural? Yes. Why? It's called contextualization. Under times of COVID, it is better that we do it this way. Change it from one context to the next. Therefore, what does all the churches of Christ greet you mean? Well, God wanted to put something in the Bible that I could put on the bulletin. Okay, and so now that I have it on the bulletin, or I have it on my business card, all the churches of Christ greet you. No. Paul lists a number of house churches in Romans 16, and by the time he gets to this verse, in verse 16, he's communicating that there are other people out there who are your brothers and sisters who are praying for you because Nero is a really bad dude. The churches of Christ are greeting you. It's like Joyce and I both had cancer. Her cancer has been, more significant than mine. But anybody who's had cancer, beginning to talk to somebody else who had cancer, i.e., for instance, Dan Winkler and my wife have had the same kind of cancer, there's like this immediate affinity. Why? Because you know about radiation, don't you? You know about chemotherapy, don't you? You know about surgeries, don't you? Why is that? It's the C word, cancer. Now the C word is church. The church knows what you're going through. And they are greeting you, which means they know what you're going through. And right now, somebody who's a brother and sister of yours is praying for you. Like some of you sent Ralph some cards from the Asheville Road Church for the gospel meeting. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful for you thinking about this and praying about it. That's what it means the churches of Christ greet you. So, as time will allow, here are the two groups in the churches of Christ. They have begun to separate themselves since, I guess officially, the early 1980s. So for about 35 years now, there's been a group that don't like sinning. Sinning would be the pattern theology. What is sinning again now, Colton? You remember? So what is sinning? Command, example, necessary inference. Thank you very much. Your voice changed, but I love it. Okay, command, example, necessary inference. And then there are those that say, no. That's too pattern-oriented. There's a pattern for the church. There's a pattern for church organization. There's a pattern for salvation, and a pattern. And they say that does not represent the Bible as a whole. Because although there are patterns in the Bible, some of them wouldn't even argue that. Certainly, we've been treating the Bible in a bad way. So how do you treat it better? Grace-centered theology. Grace-centered would be, I'm going to talk more about grace and mercy and love. Listening to an old song on the Sirius Next network coming up here yesterday, shower the people that you love with love. All right? So you shower the people that you love with love, and you're going to be more touchy-feely because it's about love and mercy and grace. And many of them don't perceive that the traditional churches of Christ understand much about that. Therefore, there's a change in paradigms. A paradigm, you know what that is? It's 20 cents. Okay, a paradigm, however, is a different way of looking at something. All right, I've got my glasses. I assume, Drew, you would not see well with my glasses. You wearing contacts at all? Okay, well, I don't want to talk to you. Okay, all right, so we have then, all right, if I put on your glasses, you put on mine, the odds of us seeing equally well are very slim because they're custom made, right? Okay, so if I change the way that I am thinking about something, I'm taking off one set of glasses and I'm putting on another set of glasses, and sometimes this is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable as we try to think, well, what are we going to do about the next generation, especially in the area that is public, which is the church. That's why I wrote the book, to talk about things that have to do with the church. Now, the older guys, I'm going over here. Don't let me offend you, but I'm going to say this is the older group today. But you're not old. Okay, all right, but we're going to say, don't be offended. This is the older group. All right, now we're in the Church of Christ a long time, and we are used to duty, honor, responsibility, and respect. Why do you go to church? Duty, honor, responsibility, and respect. Why do you go to church? Well, because you have a body temperature, and your mother will wipe you out if you don't. Okay, you go to church. That's why your mother says you do this. Or your daddy says you do this. Why? It is a part of the greatest generation, World War II. Duty, honor, responsibility, respect, i.e. Memorial Day. Thinking of those who have died for the cause and giving them the duty, honor, and respect that they deserve by eating another ham sandwich. Okay, but anyway, you do this on Memorial Day, and we're thankful, are we not, for those. Have you served? Hands up. Have you served in the military? Hands up. Okay, so we're thankful for what you have done, honestly. But whenever you think about this generation, that's the way they think. Now, the new generation has kind of gotten worn out by this. And the first paradigm would be the church as an institution. A lot of our buildings will say AD 33, which is probably the wrong date because there's at least a 5-year error in there, but that's another story. Okay, so the church is an institution, establishment, or an organization. Now, the new guys, as a whole, what do they want? Well, they want relationships and they want meaningful worship. They want to go to church with somebody that they feel close to and makes them fit in. And to tell you the truth, this group right here is not going to be thinking doctrinally so much. By the way, do you have an organ in your church? Or do you allow women to preach in your church? Or do you take the Lord's Supper every Sunday in your church? Or do you baptize for remission of sins? All of that stuff is not as important as is there a group there with whom I can personally identify and have a relationship. That's why in the Birmingham area, churches are springing up just about every Sunday, the names of which you have never heard of before. You've never heard of the name of this church. And why? Because they are learning to connect with a lot of the generation that has felt disconnected. And therefore, meaningful worship to them might be instrumental music, it might be being able to clap, it might be praise teams, it might be a lot of different things. One way or the other, they feel more at home there. Now think about your own family and where your own children or grandchildren are going to church. And I'm not asking for a show of hands here. I'm asking for you to think. How many of them were brought up in the youth group in the Church of Christ, and they are no longer anywhere to be seen? And why is that? This morning, I'm respectfully asking that question. I'm not asking this question because I know your congregation, because I don't. Although I love Drew and Julie and have for a number of years and have confidence in them. But I'm asking right now, why is it that way? I don't know all the reasons. Maybe it was too many hellfire and brimstone sermons that were preached. Maybe a local congregation, a person felt that they were cast away because they were divorced. Maybe it was, who knows what it was. Now I know that Jesus is coming. Okay, and then you say, what was that? Well, so therefore the new paradigm is the church is not an institution, but the church is a body. And being a body, it's supposed to change. You're supposed to be comfortable with change. And if we have to change to survive, then we will. Now, I know that I have about 3 or 4 minutes left. If I think the old way, which I often do because it's the way I was brought up, I believe that the church is is changeless and eternal, Hebrews 12:28. I believe in the old paths, Jeremiah 6. I believe that the restoration movement is complete. Just like some of those motorcycles at our hotel. Nobody has to restore them anymore because they've been completely restored. So don't touch them except maybe to dust them off. Also, I would find that I think more about the Church of Christ being growing so quickly in the 1960s. You've heard that, haven't you? We were growing so quickly in the 1960s. And therefore, we got 200 members, and let's protect the ones that we have rather than trying to go out there and reach new people for Jesus. Because how many new people are actually being evangelized today, and how much sheep shuffling do we have going on? That's what I call moving from one church to another, all members of the Church of Christ, some Church of Christ on the receiving end of that thinking they're growing, and then some Church of Christ on the other end of that thinking we're not growing, but as a matter of fact, there's really nobody being evangelized. There's just sheep being shuffled from one congregation to the other. Because we got a lot of sheep in Alabama. So that's thinking that way, thinking traditionally. And by the way, we still have the members that we had before COVID. We're just fine. And sound doctrine. That would mean we're sound. Hello. Introduce yourself to Ralph Gilmore, a sound gospel preacher, and his wife Joyce. She's a sound preacher's wife. And Drew's sound local preacher, and sound. By the way, when you do that, you're using it the wrong way. Because the word hugios does not mean correct on every detail. It means healthy. It means healthy. Are you giving the congregation elders a healthy diet? Not, do you agree with your sister congregation in every single point? Now, on the other hand, the new guys are wanting to change everything. Woo, let's take the Lord's Supper by swinging from a trapeze back and forth. Okay, let's just do it different. And the new ways are better than the old because you'll buy new stuff at Buc-ee's, but who wants to buy the old stuff? And then the restoration movement is ongoing, and we look more toward the future than we do the past, and we're more progressive rather than thinking about the past. And we understand that if we're standing still, we're eventually going to die. And therefore, the focus is more on relationships than it is on sound doctrine, which, by the way, is a significant matter. Because one of the characteristics of elders is that they can convict the gainsayer. And that does mean that they, when they need to, can straighten out somebody with regard to doctrine. But right now, I'm talking about the way people think. So what about the Church of Christ? Well, you might say, I can't go backwards on this, can I? Nope. Okay, you might say, well, I like some of this one and some of this one. Well, okay. But the elders as a whole need to give the congregation the vision as to what they're thinking here about how to reach the next generation. And therefore, when the new guys come along, have we always been wrong? No. There's still Acts 2, Daniel 2, Isaiah 2, Joel 2. They all teach that the church was supposed to be instituted exactly the time that it was. On the other hand, we better be able to learn something from this, because the two ways of looking at the church are not mutually exclusive in every case. So what you find out then is that we've been thinking a lot like a sectarian group. Who are you? Well, I'm Ralph Gilmore. You a Church of Christ preacher? Oh, yeah. Wife Church of Christ? Yeah. Children Church of Christ? Yeah, I've all been baptized. About your house Church of Christ? Yeah. Driveway? It's Church of Christ too. I got a Church of Christ insurance salesman. I got a Church of Christ insurance policy. Why? Because we're Church of Christ, Church of Christ, Church of Christ, Church of Christ. We are using the phrase in the wrong way. But I love you. Okay? So it means like the Church of Christ does not mean a logo like Under Armour. It means like a description, as in the church that belongs to Jesus. So therefore, we let other people out-preach our sermons. Our sermons should be non-denominational. Our belief should be non-denominational. We are non-denominational. I am not a member of the Church of Christ denomination. I have been added to the body of believers because I did what the Bible said to do to be saved. And He added me to that. That does not make me Church of Christ. It makes me saved. I'll talk some more later. Thank you. I don't want to work up on it. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.